We've been exploring various wargaming tactics. This idea that regardless of style, system, or faction that you're playing, whatever that named system is right now, maybe it's Warhammer 40K, maybe it's Battletech, maybe it's X-Wing miniatures, there is this idea of rules and dice coming together to simulate the fog of war, to simulate what you can do. And within that, there are certain tactics, certain fundamental tactics that are always going to be in play. Before we get into armies, before we get into various factions, you want to be aware of these for two reasons. First is portability. You're going to have the ability, if you can cultivate kind of the ability to see these things and utilize them, to take that to any wargaming system and immediately start doing very well, cut down the learning curve. Likewise, when you find yourself in uncharted territory, something happens, you're up against an army that you've never faced before, you're in a tournament format that you've never played before, what do? You have these fundamentals. And layered over this, tremendous opportunity. And I'm serious when I say that, in that often in a wargaming system, we get so focused in the meta, the hyper, the building the army, and those are all important. But these overall opportunities, as they present themselves, they're there to take it, right? Tabletop immortality is yours. Take it. So being on the lookout for these wargaming fundamentals, wargaming rules. Within that framework, and I've pushed up to the channel Wargaming Tactics 101, we've been exploring a lot of these. I want to point out a real-time example, and how this can be utilized, again, regardless of the system that you're playing. And this is going to be one of them where you can understand the fundamentals of a guaranteed action or a possible action, knowing when to use them, when not to use them, and generally speaking, what's the better call. And this is especially important if it's a competitive game, like in a tournament, or like, I'm not naming any names, but certain wargaming friends that I love, but I can't lose to them because I'll hear about it all week. Or is this just kind of a friendly matchup where you want to see something cool happen and roll some dice and have a couple of laughs? So here's the real-time example. The question is going to be, can you see this opportunity, this possibility in your own wargaming system? I've been jumping into Catapult Feud. This is kind of a re-imaging of crossbows and catapults, right? Little plastic catapults, little plastic crossbows, shooting hard foam balls or tokens across the table real time to blow up your opponent's castle. You kind of build a castle and you try to knock it down. So the tactics here are knock down your castle and your soldiers, your men, your warriors inside the castle before mine. Now, we've got some construction in terms of building. We've got some weapons that we're going to utilize. But there's an interesting expansion, the Hydra expansion. And if you've been following my channel, you know I'm a completionist. Like, we're going to roll with every expansion. We're going to include absolutely everything. This expansion, the Hydra, it's a model. It's got 3 heads. The center head, you pull back, you load a fireball into it, which is just kind of this soft/medium rubber ball, and launch it at your opponent's castle. The strength of this is the power, and literally the kinetic power, and the range. So in Catapult Feud, it's about 5 feet distance between your castle and my castle. The Hydra sits in the middle of the table off to the side. So it only has to traverse the firing halfway. On top of that, it's very, very powerful kinetically to smash into it. So immediately we're going to look to utilize this, right? This is another weapon. So playing with all of the expansions in play as of this moment, still waiting for the Vikings, your options are shoot my catapult, shoot my crossbow, utilize my battering ram, or as a free action, look, anytime I hear free, I like that. As a free action, utilize the Hydra. So here's the tactics. That's the framework within it. And this is an example of Catapult Feud looking at it from the perspective of a beer and pretzels game. I build some castles. I knock some things down. I try to build a good fortification, but sometimes I build it really high and I put a soldier up on top and kind of taunt my opponent, and we have a lot of fun making a big mess. But there is some tactica to it. We can apply these wargaming tactics to something as simple as this type of game. So the Hydra, the mechanics, there's a small deck of cards. That's an important operative, small deck of cards. And when you want to utilize the Hydra, it's a free action. So you can choose to do it or not, and you can do your other actions and your other weapons. You draw a card. There's 3 types of cards. The first card is fire the Hydra, right? Load up a fire orb, fire it away. The second is the Hydra is really pissed. It's going to blast 2. You get to fire 2 shots. Fritz likey. I like that right there. The third is the Hydra scares away one of your soldiers. Now in the core, you have a limited number of soldiers. You have 5 soldiers that are placed on your mat. When they're knocked over or removed from your mat, regardless of the condition of your castle, you're out of the game. So in exploring this with the Hydra, yes, it's a free action. But if I draw a card and it scares away one of my soldiers, I'm down 1. I'm down 1 soldier. It's a small deck of cards, right? Small deck of cards, which means I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but within there, at the beginning of the game, there's not a lot to draw. It could be one of 3. One of 3 possibilities. If it was a much larger deck, a side example would be Wings of Glory World War I, deck management, right? Wings of Glory World War I, fly around little planes and try to shoot each other down. The damage deck is a deck of cards where you draw cards every time you get hit. And there's a number value on there, 0, 1, 3, which represents how many hull points you lose. And a couple of other effects like engine damage, rudder damage, you're on fire. But there's one card in there that's an explosion, which regardless of your plane, regardless of the hull points you have, you hit a fuel tank, it catches on fire, your plane explodes from the air. Well, at the beginning of the game, it's a pretty big deck of damage cards. At the beginning of the game, that could be on the top deck, could be card number 1. I've had that happen, but most likely it's somewhere mixed in there. As you go through the game and draw damage, and that deck gets smaller and smaller, if the explosion card hasn't been drawn yet, then the chances are it's coming up real soon. Do you want to take any type of damage? But within that framework, it's a large deck. The Hydra expansion here, it's a very small deck. So there's a pretty good chance right out of the gate that I'm going to draw one of these cards to scare away one of my soldiers. I'm going to be down from 5 to 4. And that could be opening round. That could be turn 1. That could be later in the game. Now, when do we utilize this? So the tactic here is what you're going to see in wargaming is there'll often be a randomness or a tax or some sort of potential penalty to use an ability. You don't know if it's going to work. Oh, likewise, if you get scared off, you not only do you lose a soldier, you can't fire it. So you lose that turn. Versus the catapult, I can fire every single turn consistently, constantly. So what you want to look at in this overall tactic is what's guaranteed. No matter turn 1, turn 5, the state of my castle, how many soldiers do I have left? What is guaranteed? The weapons next to my castle. I'm firing them every single turn. The Hydra is not a guarantee. Do I want to embrace that possibility and use that possibility where not only could I not get to shoot, yeah, I could draw 2 and fire twice. Not only do I get to shoot, I don't get to shoot, but I lose one of the soldiers. So you'll see these units in wargaming, or you'll see these opportunities that if you pay a tax or embrace some sort of random, then it may or may not work. You're usually, mostly, better off going with the guarantee. Here's an example from a little while ago. Warhammer 40,000, playing Tyranids, a.k.a. space bugs. You could take these Carnifexes. Carnifexes are like giant tank battle bugs, right? Just massive smashing weapons and lots of guns, living tanks. They're a lot of points. A lot of points. So you're investing points to buy your army. A significant portion is going into this Carnifex. Well, you can take these biomorphs. You used to be able to take these biomorphs to upgrade them. And it would be like, okay, the Carnifex is 190 points. If you want this biomorph, plus 25. If you want this, plus 15. If you want this one, plus 5. So you're like mutating your space bugs. There was regeneration. Now, models have a wound at the time, and regeneration means when you lost a couple of wounds, the Carnifex had a number of wounds, you could roll a d6. And if you got a 6, you got your wounds back. So you'd say, well, hey, I've got this expensive piece. I have a chance to regenerate. 1 in 6 odds. That's not a bad chance, right? I mean, I'd like 1 in 3. It's never going to be 1 in 2, but 1 in 6, the dice gods willing, we can roll that out. Well, this is an example, much like Catapult Feud. It's not a guarantee. If I'm spending the points for a Carnifex, I'm getting the guarantee of something on the table. I'm getting a space bug that I get to put down and a pretty cool model. This regeneration biomorph, it's no guarantee. It might never work. And what we see is if I take 3 or 4 or 5 Carnifexes, and I put regeneration on every single one, may or may not work, but I could easily take almost 1 or 2 more based on if I don't take regeneration. And that's a guaranteed, because I get a guaranteed model that can do something. So jumping back to Catapult Feud, the guarantee is what's in my castle that I can shoot? The Hydra, no. Now let's talk about risk management, because that's understanding also. Because you say, well, Fritz, I counter that because, look, 3 types of cards. Hydra goes boo, scares off one of your guys. Fire 1, fireball, fire 2. It's very powerful kinetically. And on top of that, it's half the distance. I mean, the Hydra does blast stuff away. So when do we utilize that? You want to use it at the beginning of the game. Because at the beginning of the game, turn 1, turn 2, maybe turn 3, Catapult Feud plays very, very fast. Surprisingly, the catapults are very, very accurate. I'm laughing because back in the day, playing crossbows and catapults, they were not accurate at all. I mean, you'd wrap around like 2 or 3 rubber bands around that to overdrive it. And at some point, we would just wind up like trying to shoot each other by accident. It was very hard to knock down the castles, even with the crossbow. But in Catapult Feud, they're very, very solidly engineered and accurate. Within that framework, the Hydra, so within that framework, by turn 3, you're already losing dudes, your castle's busted up, you're trying to repair stuff, you're trying to move your siege engines forward. There's a lot of action, it goes very, very fast. So if I'm going to use that Hydra, then I want to use it at the beginning of the game, because if it scares off, then I still have 4 soldiers. If I can combine it with an alpha strike, right? We see this in Battletech, where you try and shoot all your guns at once, massive amounts of damage. Then can I play other cards if I'm playing with the stratagem cards? Can I fire my catapult twice? Because there's a card that lets you fire it twice. Can I fire the catapult twice and engage the Hydra at turn 1 or turn 2? That's got some serious bite. If I'm going to go for that risk and play it from that perspective, that is when I do it. By the middle or end game, I'm down soldiers. Maybe I'll count the cards, depending on if I utilize it and if my opponent utilizes it, and there's been like 2 or 3 scare-offs, so then I know the rest of the deck is generally safe. But at that point, you're usually pretty banged up or the game is almost over. Understanding that risk management, understanding this idea in wargaming, usually, mostly, 99% of the time, you take what is guaranteed and is always going to work, and don't invest in something that might hurt your army or never really utilize your army. If you have the chance to roll dice or shoot something, you take it. You don't go with the maybe. On the side note, finishing it out, and again, looking at your own system, if we sit down to play a Wargamer, we sit down to play Catapult Feud, I'm activating that Hydra like every other turn, because tabletop glory is there, and I love expansions, and I love utilizing stuff, because I'm just playing it for fun, and we're trying to create some fun memories. That's narrative Fritz. You hit me on tournament Fritz, then here we go, right? Then we really got to look at these rules. So again, understanding these rules in your system, these opportunities, these possibilities, these places where you can seize an advantage, and knowing when you have a little bit of room that you can roll the dice and gamble, never tell me the odds, or are you locked into such a gameplay where No, absolutely not. Wargaming Fundamentals 101.